if you've been in this business long enough, sometimes calls don't go well.
Yeah, and sometimes, you do everything right and the call still doesn't go well.
Right.
I mean, that is going to happen. Sometimes calls just go badly.
Soundtrack. Welcome to In Service, the EMS podcast, where frontline experience meets leadership insight. Hosted by Jason Falvey, a seasoned paramedic and EMS leader with over 30 years in the field. This show brings you conversations with people shaping emergency medical services today. From street-level medics to innovators on the bleeding edge of EMS, we dive into real stories, leadership strategies, and what it takes to build high-performing teams in high-stakes environments. Let's get in service.
Today's guest is a true EMS icon with over 4 decades of experience in emergency medical services, spanning both the ground, air, and behind the scenes. He's played a pivotal role in shaping how care is delivered. He's a paramedic, former flight medic, and currently serves as the clinical operations manager in Metropolitan Atlanta. You may have seen him on Trauma, Life in the ER, but his real legacy is the countless medics he's trained, the protocols he's shaped, and the standard of care he's helped raise. Welcome, Merritt Riner. Good morning.
Good morning.
So, Merritt, tell us where you grew up or where you're from.
Well, I was born and raised in Savannah, Georgia. So I spent my early years, in that area or in that, country area between Savannah, South Carolina area is where I grew up and was raised at.
What inspired you to enter EMS?
Well, I actually joined the volunteer fire department when I was 14. Rural South Georgia, which is where I was living at the time. It was all volunteer department. There were no paid departments whatsoever in the county I lived in. It was all volunteer. And their station happened to be within walking distance of my house.
Yeah.
So I actually joined up when I was 14, used to ride my motorcycle up there and train with them and do stuff. Wasn't old enough at the time to actually drive the truck.
Yeah.
Or, to truly fight fire because you had to be 16 in Georgia at the time. So by the time I turned 16, I'd actually had the Georgia firefighter training class 3 times. I had taken it every year. And then when I turned 16, I officially took it, and became certified, as a firefighter at that point, and then started, truly, working with the fire department more.
How many paramedics were around back then?
The county service back then, run 1 ambulance at the time with 1 truck out of 1 station, at that time. So there would have been 1 paramedic on duty in the county, at a time, and they were on a 24-hour shift. So there would have been 4 full-time paramedics for the entire county.
Wow. That's a large area to cover, right? Population was pretty small, though, right?
Oh, yeah. Back then, that was in Effingham County, which is on the outskirts of Savannah, or 1 county over. So it would have been very rural at the time.
So it was seeing those medics in action that kind of inspired you to...
Yeah, and my sister actually was a paramedic with Effingham County EMS. She had started as a nurse in the hospital and then had got her cardiac technician license back then. Yeah. And then her paramedic and actually worked for the county service at the time. So I used to do some ride-alongs with her as well. But I actually truly started in that volunteer fire department side as a volunteer firefighter and then as a firefighter first responder. After I turned 16, I took the first responder class. At that point, obviously I had a driver's license and could legally drive.
Right. What was this, back in the 80s or?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right at 1980.
Wow. Man, you've been doing this a long time.
It has been a while.
And you've probably seen EMS evolve over the years to a tremendous extent.
It has changed. Some for the better, some for the worse. Obviously when I first started in EMS, our call volume was very, very low. People called 911 when they truly needed an ambulance. Like they literally were dying and they would call an ambulance. So,
not anymore.
Generally speaking, back in those days, if you got an ambulance call, it someone truly needed an ambulance. And we almost always transported patients to the hospital because they only called when they truly needed help.
Right. What was equipment like? Because when I got started, we had 3 leads in the early 90s.
We did. So when I first got started in EMS, we had some LifePak 4s, which were big old bulky things that were just a 3-lead only. We even still had a few of the flip top that were the aluminum case monitors where you flipped up the top and the paddles were actually in the lid. And the screen was just, like a 2-inch by 3-inch screen. And it would print out, like that one single lead. And that's all it did. It didn't have a pacer or anything of that nature, And I remember when the LifePak 5s were brand new. When we first started getting LifePak 5s on the ambulances.
So I came in, that was LifePak 10, right, which had a pacer, and the 5s were able to split them, right?
Right. The 5s were the ones that had individual batteries, and you had a button and you could take them apart, and they didn't have to be together. You monitor one patient with one and then defibrillate with the other one, but you're right. It did not have a pacer on it, and it did 3-lead only.
Yeah. And now we're hands-off defibrillation, but paddles was way cooler back then.
Oh, yeah. Paddles with the gel was the thing back then.
That was it.
Like you see on Emergency Note when they're rubbing the paddles together.
So what inspired you to take a leadership role? And you've been in it quite a while now.
Yeah, and really, when I first got into EMS, obviously as an EMT way back then, that would have been, in the mid-'80s after I graduated high school. I actually went to EMT school. I got my first job, in EMS a little bit further out. I went to work for Scriven County EMS at the time, as an EMT, again, even more rural than F&M County.
Right.
Kind of in that same line. It's on the Savannah River. So it's almost exactly halfway between Augusta and Savannah. Extremely rural county, 1 ambulance, a call shift, which at the time was exactly the same as F&M County, where I had, done some rides at. So I started there as an EMT and worked there for about 1.5 years before I decided to go to paramedic school, which even back then was way different than it is now. I had 2 options, and I could go to Savannah through Memorial Health, which had a paramedic program that was run by the Department of Nursing, or I could go to MCG in Augusta and take their paramedic program, which was run by the School of Medicine.
Yeah, Augusta's right around the corner from Savannah.
Yeah. Well, yeah, it's only about 140 miles apart. But living in Scriven County at the time, I was equal, right? It was equal distance. So I had actually applied to both of them because those were the only 2 options. The next closest paramedic program in the state of Georgia from there was Macon. Now, like when my sister went to school, she went to Georgia Southern. But they had been many years, closed that program down. So they run a program at Georgia Southern in the Con Ed department there for a while. But at that time, the only 2 paramedic programs in South Georgia was Savannah and Augusta. That was it.
When I went, there was only 2 programs in Massachusetts. You either went out to Cape Cod or you went to Boston University. That was it. And either one of them was I drive to get there. So what are your current roles and responsibilities here?
So currently I'm the clinical operations manager for all of the Georgia ground operations. So I see, everything that is to do with clinical, anything to do with patient care, whether it's protocols, drugs, controlled substances, anything to do with patient care falls under my realm. Obviously I have other job duties as well, but my primary role is to oversee all of the clinical operations for all of the ground side.
Wow. That's a huge responsibility.
So I do, I spend most of my time here, but I do spend a good bit of time in the other operations as well, usually 1 to 2 days a week. And then I do make the trek to LaGrange. I try and go at least once every 2 weeks or more frequently, but it is a haul. It's 98 miles one way to get to that range operation. But again, that takes me back to my roots because it is more akin to where I started. It is a very rural area.
Right.
Clearly we're running a lot more trucks. I was used to running 1 ambulance and 1 crew on call. That's all we had
county.
For the whole county.
Yeah.
But LaGrange, generally runs 5 trucks, which is substantially more than what I started in. But still, LaGrange is, for the most part, a very rural county.
Now, I'd be remiss if I didn't ask you if any EMS calls in your career stand out.
I mean, obviously,
Any war stories?
Spanning over 40 years, I have, countless calls, that stand out. And I guess it depends. Obviously, years, I was a flight paramedic for 5 years, in Savannah with Lifestar back when they were a hospital-based service. And back in those days, too, on the helicopter, we were the only helicopters. It wasn't like now.
Yeah.
People ask that all the time about, what our volume was like in those days. And, 5 or 6 flights a shift, wasn't that uncommon, back in that day. And, people are like, wow, that seems like a lot. But then you have to keep in mind that our flight range was 150 miles back in that day.
Wow.
And there were no other helicopters. I mean, the next closest helicopter to us was Charleston, had a helicopter that was a sister ship, to the helicopter in Savannah that was at MUSC, the Medical University of South Carolina in Charleston. And Augusta would sometimes have a helicopter. They did, and then they didn't, then they did, then they didn't. But truly, Jacksonville had a dedicated helicopter, and then Atlanta, had Georgia Baptist. Baptist fly out of the old Georgia Baptist Hospital, which became, Atlanta Medical Center years later.
So what was the average flight time to get to a scene?
It just depended on where we were going. We did some local flights out toward the island some.
Right.
You'd see some scene flights and a little bit out in the outskirts of Chatham County. But most of our scene flights were over into South Carolina or further out. So 30 minutes, was kind of the norm. But sometimes we would go further for scene flights, just depending. But most of our longer flights were going to be like the hospital transfers, like where, trauma patients or whatever type of patient, they've been picked up by local EMS and brought into the hospital, and then we would go get, and we would have a one-way leg, of, 55 to 60 minutes of rotor time.
Wow.
In one direction to get to a patient.
Yeah. And then you got to come back with them.
And then we have to come back with them. But again, back in those days, we were in Savannah, and there wasn't nobody else. So all the way down to Brunswick, and then sweeping across the Waycross and Vidalia and Valdosta, all that area, we covered all of that area. That was all in our.
And that 55 minutes back is not with a, routine dialysis transport. We're talking a critical patient.
Yeah, for the most parts, critical patients.
Right.
Probably, we flew a lot of bad calls. And a lot of scene flights.
Yeah, you told me once that you had a camera crew flying with you and you had to leave the guy on the scene.
Yeah. Yeah, when we had My Life in the ER was a show back in the day. And the camera crew would fly with us out to scenes. But if we got on scene and the patient was large, sometimes the cameraman got left, which was a thing. Helicopters are very weight dependent. So if we had a short scene flight, it was a strong possibility the cameraman was getting left behind. Or in one case, when they were with us, we had 2 patients. So there was no way they were going back with us, so they got left and then had to, but they had more than one cameraman, right? So we would leave one cameraman at the scene. He would fly with us, film at the scene, film us taking off from the scene. And then there was another camera person at the hospital on our arrival that would film us landing and unloading the patients. So,
right. Tell us a little bit about the clinical investigation process.
It really, it varies. So a true clinical investigation is usually triggered by some type of complaint. We do find some stuff, doing QA, but for the most part, most of our true clinical investigations revolve around some type of complaint, whether that comes from the patient themselves or from the hospital that the patient was delivered to will sometimes raise concerns, or sometimes our fire department partners will see something on scene that will raise a concern that they will bring to my attention, that then we will start to investigate, and look at, what's going on. That process.
So it's the trigger is going to be most likely a complaint.
Generally, the trigger for a true clinical investigation is going to be a complaint. Now, that complaint could be internal as well. It could be a partner raising a concern about something that happened on a call, or another crew sometimes will raise a concern, like they see something at the hospital, or stuff that will automatically trigger a review is a crew going to a call that another crew was on earlier.
Yeah. And I've seen you go through investigation process. You're incredibly thorough, and you're just the right person to be doing that. Just with your background and your knowledge and your temperament.
Yeah, and I truly don't, because you can always Monday morning quarterback a call, and say, well, what would I have done different? Well, it's super easy to look at a call after the fact when you know what the outcome was. The patient's been dropped at the hospital, they've been seen, they've had all their care. It's really easy when you know all of that information on the backside to say, oh, well, I would have done this. Well, yeah, knowing what you know on the backside, it's real easy to say that, which is what we would call that Monday morning quarterbacking, right? You know what the outcome was. Well, I would have done this differently.
I think the reality, if you've been in this business long enough, is that sometimes calls don't go well.
Yeah, and sometimes, you do everything right and the call still doesn't go well.
Right.
I mean, that is going to happen. Sometimes calls just go badly and there is no fault.
Right.
There's no fault. There's no blame to lay anywhere. Some calls just go badly, in general. This is EMS. We have calls with bad outcomes.
Right.
Even when you do everything perfect, there's a bad outcome. And that's just EMS. So I try and temperament when I'm doing investigations, of one, getting all the information first.
Right.
Trying to, there's always multiple sides to every story, and EMS is the same way. If a hospital's got a complaint, they have their perspective. We have our crew's perspective. I usually get fire's perspective. If law enforcement was on scene, I'll try and get their perspective. If I can get body camera footage from on scene, that really helps. It generally takes the he said, she said out of the process. So then you're not really relying on what people's perspective is. Because again, if you got multiple people on a scene, everybody sees everything differently.
Right.
And you can ask 4 or 5 people and you'll get 4 or 5 versions or variations of the same story.
So what should a medic do? He finds himself in a call, it just didn't go well, and is going to be a problem here. What?
Bring it to our attention.
Yeah.
First and foremost, it is bring it to our attention. I would rather crew self-report a problem. I mean, anything that's outside of the normal on a call should be reported at a minimum to the shift supervisor.
Right. And they can loop you in.
Right. And then they can loop myself or either operations in, as needed. But it's much easier for me to get ahead of issues before they happen.
Right.
Right. It's all about, patient care. I mean, We are a patient care company. I mean, we're a healthcare company that happens to offer transport.
Right.
So obviously it's all about taking care of the patient. That is ultimately should be our end goal, is to take care of the patient.
I agree. Let's shift over and talk a little bit about CMQP.
Mm-hmm.
Right. How does it, tell us what that acronym stands for?
So quality metrics, so continuous quality metrics program, is what it stands for. And basically it's just another form of CQI, right? Or continuous quality improvement. So obviously crews have been hearing about this program. We started it last year specifically with one metric, which was the blood glucose for altered mental status patients. And then have expanded that, in 2025 to have 3 metrics, the blood glucose, the advanced airway verification, and the trauma metric of patients going to a respective trauma facility or a designated trauma facility. There are significantly more metrics in that. So that program is just going to continuously grow. Those are the 3 we started with, but that program will grow.
Now, are we reporting this metrics up and out to an outside agency?
Yes. So we report this internally all the way up through leadership. So we do have a monthly call with all of the leadership both at the state level and at the regional level, where we go over our metrics in all three of the ground operations. And I will point out, this is not very specific to our operation. It includes all the air bases. So we're reporting our ground metrics on that monthly call. So are all 15 of the air bases.
Wow.
Right behind us are reporting on the exact same metrics.
So what's the biggest challenge?
It's documentation. Your data is no better than your documentation. And some of these metrics are very much a documentation. Take, for instance, the trauma 04 metric, which is the evaluation of a patient, or trauma patients going to a designated trauma facility. That metric specifically is a documentation metric because that is going by the hospital capabilities tab of the crew picking. So instead of picking, closest or most appropriate or something of that nature, they actually have to pick that hospital is a trauma hospital. By what level? Level 1, 2, 3, 4.
Down the road, the state or the federal government could use that data to see if we need more trauma centers or increase the level of the trauma centers.
They do, because, while we're reporting on that metric, it actually is. That's why it's called the trauma 04 metric, it is a NIMS-Q. So it is a national trauma metric. Patients that meet trauma triage criteria that are going to a designated trauma hospital.
So in addition to all that, we use that data for education support.
So truly a true CQI program should drive your in-services and your education. So if we see a specific area that needs improvement, we may do some type of education specifically to improve on that specific metric.
And where do you see this going in 5-10 years? It's just going to expand, I would imagine.
It is going to expand. Like I said, there are multiple of those metrics, that are on the corporate side, of our footprint that we're looking at, at the national level. We started with 3, but there's about 15 of those metrics. Wow. And they pretty much match the national metrics too. Like I say, you've got the NIMS-Q or the national EMS metrics or quality metrics, which is part of that blueprint for the future. So our corporate metrics are pretty much matching the national metrics. It's just a phase in. At some point, we will be monitoring all of those metrics with much more focus. We monitor all of those metrics now, in some form or fashion, but at some point in time, just like we've put focus on these 3 metrics specifically, at some point in time, we will get those metrics where we want them.
Yeah. And
then we will move on to other metrics. Like I'm sure in 2026, we will probably add another 2 or 3 metrics. And in some cases, those are closed call rule, what we call a closed call rule. Like our blood glucose metric, is really, really good because it's also one that the state of Georgia, looks at. So on our reporting system, like if you put the patient has a stroke, it mandates or forces the crew to put in a blood glucose. The national metric, though, is not just specific to that. It's any altered mental status patient, which is our true metric is, any patient with a GCS below 14. So 13 and below, and it has to be a 911 call that's being transported to the hospital, is what's going to trigger that metric. So like back transports to the nursing home, things of that nature, really don't fall into that metric. They try and weed those out. Sometimes they'll fall in, but really, everything is about just driving those metrics forward. And it really is all about patient care. We know that the vast majority of our patients that have an altered mental status, our crews are taking a blood sugar.
Yeah.
It's a matter of, are they documenting that blood sugar? The same goes like for the advanced airway metric. We know when crews, are intubating a patient or putting in an iGel, they're putting them on end-tidal CO2. They're listening to breath sounds. It's just a matter of documenting the care we're providing. We're providing the care that's needed. We just need to do a better job of documenting that care.
Right. The other day we talked a little bit about blood products and other services are starting to deploy them. And then we shifted into talking about TXA and ANCEF. What is the frequency of use? What are we seeing here for frequency of use with TXA and ANCEF?
It's not real frequent. I mean, we do use it occasionally, but it's not real frequent. And then the question begs is, are we using it or utilizing that drug as much as we could? Right. I mean, because a lot of that comes, into play when you start looking at, wanting to expand, on the care. I mean, because, obviously we carry TXA. That's a pretty common drug now. Most ambulance services are carrying TXA. They're giving, but the ANCEF is not that common. I mean, so, we're an outlier in that and trying to set that standard of care when it comes to like trauma care, because the ANCEF is very specific to trauma, as is the TXA of treating those trauma patients. So it really, our usage, we do see some usage of it, since we implemented it. But I'm sure, there's probably more patients that would benefit from the TXA and or the ANCEF being given in the pre-hospital setting.
And time is a factor in it. But if you have a short transport time, time's going to be a factor in that. They may not be thinking with all the things they got to do to hang that.
Right, to hang that. But, again, that needs to be in the back of their mind, because that does kind of play in, to the whole blood products discussion.
Yeah.
That is a complex. So, yeah, some of the services around us are starting to carry it. Grady, has implemented a program that's been pretty successful. I mean, they've started it, their blood, and they're doing whole blood. And they're very specific to trauma. Their protocols are very specific to trauma only. Patients above a certain age. They had the capabilities of using it on non-trauma, but they have to call for orders. It's not protocol driven. But it's very complex, carrying blood. So we're working on that, aspect. We're actively working on it for other operations. We're actively working on getting blood products. Those programs will look a little bit different.
But the need for it, right? The indicator here is, are we using TXA?
Are we using TXA? I mean, there's more indicators, but that would be one of the key indicators is how often are we using TXA? I mean, if we're using TXA once a month, then do we truly need blood? I mean, there's more indicators there. When you start looking at it, I mean, we've been working on the blood program for quite a few months. That we've been talking about it and then actively working on that program. So, I mean, it is a process. It's just not say, hey, we want to carry blood and we go out and get blood. First, you have to show there's a need for it. And, and part of that is we do look at the TXA usage. Then when we look at shock indexes. So we would pull reports and show what our shock indexes are. How many patients are we transporting that meet that shock index for trauma that would indicate that they possibly need a blood transfusion emergently? But then even more telling than that, one step of that process is to go back to our trauma hospitals. We have some, how many of our tier 1 trauma patients that we're bringing in received a blood transfusion within 30 minutes of arrival. And, and that kind of shows what our need would be for blood, the operation. I mean, it is a very expensive program. Startup cost, even for a small operation, you'd be looking, into tens of thousands of dollars.
Right.
For the equipment that you need, for the storage and handling of the blood, is a huge component to that. And then the ongoing cost. I mean, blood isn't expensive. I mean, you're looking for whole blood around $600 a unit, and it has a very short shelf life.
What's the shelf life is on that?
21 days.
Wow.
Yeah, there's no thing. It's 21 days from the date it's collected. So generally, if it's collected and then we get it pretty quick within, say, 2 days of collection, we've got 18 or 19 working days,
right,
for that blood product. I mean, and depending on what whole blood versus plasma versus packed red cells, the dates move around some. But whole blood, generally, you're looking at that 18 or 19 days. From the moment you receive it until it's no longer good. And that's if you maintain that temperature standard, of where it's supposed to be kept at, which is super cold.
What's in the future?
Oh, change.
Yeah.
I mean, EMS is changing. It's already been changing some. I mean, we've started to adapt to it because that is going to be the theme, I think, for the next 5 to 10 years is change. I mean, the old standard, just like we'll go all the way back to when we started the podcast, talking about when I started in EMS in a rural area, our call volume was exceedingly low. People called an ambulance when they needed an ambulance.
Right.
That's just not the case anymore. I mean, true, we do run true emergency calls, but I'd be willing to bet that if 10% of our emergency calls that we run are true emergencies that are life-threatening, that would probably be a generous percentage. Sometimes patients, need EMS. It's not just about they're critically hurt or sick. Sometimes, they may not be a life-threatening emergency, but EMS is their best transport method or their only transport method.
Right, or it could evolve quickly to
right, or it could evolve, to it. But, there's so much more volume there in EMS than used to be. But I think, part of that relies on EMS. During the 90s, we did these huge national campaigns about if you're having a medical emergency, dial 911, because that was the thing. So we've done a good campaign over the years of doing that to the point that now people call 911 for everything. And they truly don't need to go to the hospital, and they surely don't need to go to the hospital by ambulance.
Right. They should probably contact their primary care
physician or go to urgent care. Right. And I think that's part of what you're seeing with some of our nurse navigation programs and the community paramedic programs, where you're trying to get the right resource for the right patient at the right time. And in some cases, that may be an ambulance that takes that patient to the ER, or it may be, an ambulance that takes them to urgent care, or an ambulance goes out and assesses them, or maybe a single source provider goes out and assesses them. So I think the future of EMS is going to be a multi-tiered response, and it's going to look, significantly different than it has in the past, but I think it's going to be an evolving process over the years. Right. Of what truly EMS is going to look like in the future.
Well, that's fantastic. I appreciate you coming, doing this, and I hope the information is helpful to the crews out on the road. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to In Service, the EMS podcast, where frontline experience meets leadership insight. If you have found value in this conversation, please like, subscribe, share, and leave a comment. You will find links in the episode notes.